As you learned in the last video, SJAM employed Chinese men to build the railway, and without their efforts, the goal of national policy would have failed. If the railway had not been built, people would not have come to the West and farmed. Industries would not have developed, and there would be no economy, and SJAM's dream of a strong country would have died. SJAM recognized the contribution that the Chinese made and said, without the Chinese, there would be no railway. But wait a minute. Mrs. Carroll said that the Chinese suffered discrimination and prejudices. If they were so important to the building of Canada, how was that possible? Man, you guys are smart. I was just getting to that part. When the railway was finally completed, Canada no longer needed the Chinese, and there were not a lot of jobs for them to do. When they had expended their usefulness, SJAM began to sing a different song, and he was quoted saying, "The Chinese man has no common interest with us, and while he gives us labor, he is paid for it, and is valuable, the same as a threshing machine or any other agricultural implement, which we may borrow from the United States on hire and return it to the owner on the south side of the line. He has no British instincts or British feelings or aspirations, and therefore ought not to have a vote." The Chinese workers had been borrowed labor, and now the government wanted to return them, much like your dad needing to borrow a neighbor's lawnmower. The lawnmower is an important and necessary tool to get the job done, but your dad returns the lawnmower after he's done because he doesn't have a place for it in his garage. The other problem with the Chinese was that they were, in fact, Chinese. As we will find out in our next section, the government wanted to establish a British culture in the West and reinforce British traditions. Well, the Chinese did not fit that mold and were not considered worthy of a vote or the right to opportunities of others. But wait, Ottawa, we have a problem. Many Chinese people chose to stay, and because they were our invited guests, SJAM couldn't kick them to the coast and send them back to China. So he does the next best thing. Think about this. If you can't kick them out, what can you make it very hard for them to do? Okay, first hint, only Chinese men came over. Still need another hint? Okay, here's another one. The opportunities for families to reunite in Canada was promised. Think you got it? Let's see. The government made it hard for more Chinese people to come into Canada. Brilliant idea, eh? The first thing the government did was issue a head tax. This meant that Chinese who wanted to immigrate to Canada had to pay. The Chinese people are the only immigrant group ever in the history of Canada to have had to pay such a tax. In 1885, Chinese wanting to come to Canada had to pay $50 to enter the country. But still, Chinese people came. So in 1900, the government raised it to $100. And still, people came. So in 1903, the government raised the head tax to a whopping $500. But still, Chinese people came. Despite the government's attempt to make it difficult for the Chinese to come to Canada, they still came. So in 1923, the government issued the Exclusion Act. This act forbade people from China to immigrate to Canada. This law lasted for 24 years, separating families from uniting. So if things were so bad in Canada, why didn't the men return to China? Great thinking! Although that sounds like a reasonable solution, many of the men did not have jobs or money after the completion of the railway, and therefore not enough to book a passage home. But fear not, my dear students. The Chinese were resilient and managed to carve out a life for themselves in the West despite these hardships. The Chinese who chose to stay in Canada found jobs as cooks, storekeepers, and farmers. In British Columbia, many men worked in salmon canneries. Alberta had the highest population of Chinese immigrants, and many settled on the prairies and towns along the railway and opened restaurants and laundromats. Think about this for a minute. There's a Chinese food restaurant in most small towns in southern Alberta. I am sure you have seen them on your travels, and now you know why. Chinese people also worked in coal mines, sugar beet farms, and as cooks on cattle ranches. Chinese people also moved into certain neighborhoods which came to be called Chinatown. In part, these neighborhoods provided immigrants who came a chance to live with family and friends. Chinatowns was a distinct neighborhood rich in Chinese culture and traditions. Many people could own shops and businesses, and these neighborhoods became flourishing communities. The other part was that these communities developed because of necessity. Chinese people did not fit into Canadian society, and many people feared the different customs of the Asian newcomers. Chinese families would not be welcomed into communities, so they created Chinatowns. Today, Calgary boasts the largest Chinatown in Alberta, and in Saskatchewan, Moose Jaw has the largest Chinatown. Under the leadership of Prime Minister Harper, a recent apology was formally made to the Chinese for the discrimination and prejudices that the Chinese immigrants endured. The Canadian government also recognized the contribution of the Chinese to the development of Canada. Because if the Chinese had not come, no railway would have been built, no immigrants would have come, no industries would have grown, the economy would have failed. Canada would not have been the strong nation that it is today.